Welcome to CivilNet Live Backstage at Aurora. This is the second year of the Aurora Prize here in Yerevan, the Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity. And in conjunction with that ceremony, there is a full weekend of discussions, dialogues, the Aurora Dialogues, that tackle some of the major humanitarian challenges facing the world. And those are the challenges that face Armenians just as well. The effort today here in Dilijan at United World College Dilijan is to convene a series of discussions under the title Galvanizing the World. Galvanizing the world's population, really, to take responsibility, take action, to try to tackle some of these challenges. Over the next 3 hours, CivilNet Live will interview some of the dignitaries that are here today. Scholars, practitioners, advocates from all over the world who want to talk about their work and who want to try to corral, galvanize the world to act with them. Our first guest is Professor Beth Meyerowitz, who teaches psychology at the University of Southern California and who studies post-trauma situations. And she's here today to participate and listen through the dialogues. Beth, we're really grateful that you're here. We know why it's important for us to have people like you with CVs, portfolios, experience like yours present here. But why are you here? Why does this have meaning, value for you?
It has been so valuable to me, and I thank you so much for inviting me. I can't overstate how meaningful it is to hear from people in so many different areas of the world, from so many angles of work, who are joined together and trying to bring gratitude to action, as the Aurora Prize requests of us. It is really so remarkable. The shared vision, the shared goals. One of the things that happens, I think, in my work is, as you say, with trauma, one of the things that happens for people with trauma, and I think for those of us who work in the field as well, is that it can be very isolating. There can be one of the things that happens for people who feel trauma is a feeling of being alone, a feeling of not being understood, not being heard, being separated from the rest of humanity.
Not wanting to burden someone else with your troubles.
And feeling that it's just, the world isn't a fair place, the world isn't a safe place. And to come and see people who have dedicated their lives to showing that the world is a safe place, there is a place where people are cared about, is a place where people are heard and listened to, is such a strong message. And I'm really energized by it.
It's really great to hear, especially since the other day when we were all talking about gratitude in action, you put it in the context of scholarship. How is it looked at within the research?
There's a great deal of research actually on gratitude in the field of positive psychology, really looking not at what goes wrong for people, but at what can really go right for people and the strengths that people have. And gratitude is really considered one of the core central tenets of a strong person, a strong personality, being able to feel that gratitude. And not only at the broad global level that we're talking about here, but in everyday actions. One of the big suggestions is every night before you go to sleep, think of 3 things you're grateful for. Just to bring that sense of kindness and caring into our lives on a daily basis. One of the things researchers have found is that people who themselves have suffered can be especially effective at that. It's a construct called altruism born of suffering.
One more time.
Altruism born of suffering. And the idea that when you can truly empathize, when you've truly been there and had the support and care to turn a corner on trauma, that can really put a person in a position to be so helpful to other people and to make that a life mission, to really understand the importance of that. And I think Aurora is that in action.
That's a perfect place to segue. Beth Meyerowitz is going to lead a breakout session now here at the Aurora Dialogues Galvanizing the World Day. The rest of our conversation this afternoon live here on CivilNet will continue with my colleagues Susanna Pedrosian, Silva Sevlian, and Maral Davikian. Stay tuned. We're going to be speaking with Shantama Birosyan, who heads the Nearest Relief Foundation with a whole long history and roots in the Armenian experience. We're going to be speaking with filmmaker Eric Nazarian and many others who are here to both give and take to this dialogue about gratitude in action. about honoring the memory of our ancestors, the survivors, by doing something today to help others survive. Stay tuned, stay with CivilNet, and tell your friends.
We're here with Stephen Kirkjan. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and an author. He just finished his panel with Galvanizing the World, and we would like to speak to you about the media's role in 2017, and particularly where traditional media starts and where traditional media stops and social media begins.
Yes. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. So, my panel was titled Galvanizing the World, that the media has a role in galvanizing the world. The traditional media, which I've worked in for many years as an investigative reporter, doesn't see itself as responsible for advocating to the world what it should and should not care about. We are just a report on it. And that's what I thought about, and I was a little worried that I was not going to be part of the big message, that important message that's being given here. But then I thought about it with what we do, which is informing people with what's going on in the world. The misery spots, the tragedies, small and large. You know, the American government did not send troops to Syria to stop the devastation that was going on there when it first started 6 years ago. But the news organizations did. Many news organizations lost their reporters, cameramen, to the tragedies there. But the press stayed on the story. It didn't change the stories, but it certainly called attention to this tragedy that was unfolding. That's what we do, is we cover these events as compellingly as we can, because what we're doing in the end is informing the world that misery is taking place, and you have to respond to it. And if you don't respond to it, as the world did not do in Syria, a bigger crisis is to come. And that's what happened with the refugee crisis. So how do we now learn from that experience? I think social media is a very important part of what news covers. We cannot be everywhere. The internet has had the big effect, dramatic effect, on our revenue. Our revenue stream is not what it used to be. As a result, we don't have as many reporters, traditional reporters in the field. But what we do have is the public's confidence and the public's credibility. And the public has the ability to cover these events for us, at least let us know where it's happening. And once they let us know, then we can apply our skills. But the public has a very important role to let us know, the media know, if a devastation has happened, whether it's a fire or a natural disaster or tyranny. Once we learn about it, then we can respond in kind and informing the public with credible information, then the public can respond. So I do think what we do in informing the public with credible information is, in fact, the first step in galvanizing the world to make change.
During your Aurora dialogue, you went from macro to micro, and you shared what a significant role the 1915 reporting staff at the New York Times played. Can you share a little bit with our CivilNet team?
Yes, very good. Inchka? Okay. We are here in Dilijan, Armenia. I am spending the weekend here in Yerevan, Armenia. I am Armenian. My father was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. I have had a full and rewarding life, personal as well as professional, in America. That would not have happened. My father would never have been able to survive and come to America had it not been, not for the American government at the outset, but because of a media organization, and that was the New York Times. The New York Times were publishing more than 100 articles on the front page of their paper in 1915 about what was happening to the Armenians. And the government was not responding until our government, the American government. And once it did respond, the people responded. And people sent charity, they sent missionaries, and they sent help to open their doors to let the Armenians who were beset, were being annihilated, to come to America and begin life anew. And I am a product of that life anew. And as a result, I am particularly aware of the lives of the misery that the refugees are going through, and how, if not 5 years, certainly 20 and then 25 and 50 years from now, those refugees will become an integral part of the civilization and the cities and towns that they're living in. Important part in giving back so fully as the Armenians have in America and every other country in the world that they were part of the diaspora.
How is Aurora moving the dial?
What Aurora does is, what Aurora does is, it's a very interesting and positive thing that they are attaining here. They are not actually doing the good work, but they're giving recognition for those organizations that are doing amazingly important work in local levels. Whether it's in the fields of Afghanistan, Syria, Pakistan, wherever there is refugees or misery, man-made or not, there will be an organization that crops up out of nowhere that brings hope to those people who are in an awful way or in a terrible way. And what Aurora does is not only give money to those organizations, reward to those organizations, but they also give promotion to them. And by promoting them, you are therefore giving hope that get involved, because misery can be abated, comfort can be provided, and hope will come anew to these people who are in such suffering. Hope is the only thing that keeps us going. Hope that change will happen and that people can make a difference. So Aurora, in publicizing, promoting these organizations, is having even a larger advantage than just giving attention to these organizations. They're keeping hope alive. And that's a tremendous, tremendous thing, particularly that that's being done by 3 Armenians.
What do you think the role of the youth is today? Aurora's putting quite an emphasis on...
Yeah. Well, I'm a product of the 60s. And the 60s is the last time I saw a generation be involved in a crisis. And it made a difference then, and I hope it can make a difference now. I think it's very smart to get millennials, youth, who are eager to make the world work, not to make causes be part of what they want to do, to be involved. Aurora is showing them how to do it with networks and various groups that are doing positive things. They are providing that avenue, that path, that bridge to youthful ideals with actual work. And I think that's another positive advantage of what Aurora is helping do. It's a good thing.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to CivilNet Backstage at Aurora Prize. I'm here at UWC Dilijan with my guest, Lori Wilkinson. Lori is the editor of the International Journal of Migration and Integration, based out of Canada. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to get started by asking you what sort of things you cover at the journal.
So our journal focuses on worldwide migration. So we get papers from all around the world, people researching various aspects of why people move. So much of our papers are on international moves, but we have a special focus that other journals don't have. Most of the other journals have an academic focus. Our focus is also academic, but as a requirement for the journal, you also have to put in some policy recommendations or best practices into your paper, because our readership, which is about 8,000 subscribers, are not exclusively academics. So people who work in the immigration field to help people resettle, and governments that help resettle them also read our journal, and so that's why we're a bit different than the other academic journals.
And can you give me a sense of how your coverage has changed in the past few years as Canada is dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis and other refugee crises?
So our journal is international, so we get a lot of papers from around the world. So it's changed largely because of the attention to the Syrians. Researchers, though, it takes a little bit of time to calculate data, get the analysis done. And so we're just starting to see some of the brand new papers that are coming out on the Syrian refugees, but also the worldwide refugee crisis.
And what sort of discussions have you been involved in this weekend at the Aurora Prize, and what has been your impression of Armenia so far?
Well, this weekend I've only been here for a day, and I've already talked about Argentinian politics and American politics, and how we collectively, how governments can or don't choose to integrate people. So I think that's been really eye-opening. I've met journalists, business people, NGO leaders, politicians, that sort of thing. So it's been really enriching.
And what sort of role do you think Aurora has to play in starting these discussions and also inspiring people to take action?
Well, I think they're already doing a good job, considering this is only year 2, and it's my understanding that the conference itself is doubled in size, and the number of people who have been nominated for the Aurora Prize has more than doubled. So I think, getting the word out is great, because there's so many people who do fantastic work in the field of resettlement and integration that they need to be recognized for their humanitarian work, and there's not many opportunities to celebrate the really excellent work that gets done, that is so needed in our world.
And can you talk about some takeaways that you've had from your experience here so far, and maybe some contributions that you've brought from your work to Aurora?
One of the things that I always try to reflect on, especially when I'm in a different country, is how much of my knowledge is really embedded in my own country, and how things maybe I took for granted don't necessarily happen the same way. So I had a very interesting conversation this morning with somebody who you're about to interview, and he was talking about how his government lies about immigrants, how they try to tie them to criminal activity when in fact, immigrants in his country are way less likely to commit crime. And when I was listening to that, I thought, in my country, my government, the governments change, and some governments are more appreciative of immigrants than others, but it doesn't matter who's in power. They always have led academics like me access to their data so that I can analyze the data in a way that's, I feel, ethical and scientific, but they never tell me how to tell my story. And so my goal is always to tell a truthful story, and to give people who are in the field truthful information that will help them debunk the myths about refugees, for instance. And so as he was talking about how his government, bends the statistics to make it sound like immigrants are bad people, in my country, it's not like that. And so I'm grateful to that, but it also changed my mind about how I see the way that governments share data, because sometimes it's not very truthful.
And how do you think Canada's role has changed on the global stage as more and more countries deal with migration and refugee issues?
Folks like me, their phones are ringing off the hook with people from around the world asking questions about, how do we do things? How is it that we're successful largely in integrating people? So I think we're busier. I think we need to be open to ideas from other countries too, because we can learn from everyone. Because there's always something good going on somewhere that if we can incorporate those ideas, we can make it a better place in Canada too. So we've been really busy. People in my field have been really busy in the last 2 years trying to get out the message, actually, even just to the average person doesn't really know much about refugees. And so we've been really busy trying to figure that out and try to get the message across in a way that normal people can understand.
And how do you create those narratives for normal people to understand?
It depends, right? So we can make the humanitarian argument, which is easy for us to make, especially the people at the Aurora conversation, because that's the field that we're in.
Right.
But I found that message doesn't resonate with everybody. So the problem is that there's a small group of people who are really racist or really, really scared. They think that new people will come in and change the culture and the language and the religion, and in my country, Canada, won't be the same. That group of people is a small group of people, but it's becoming more vocal. So we've got the humanitarians on one side, we've got this small group of vocal people on the other side, but in the middle is this vast group of people who I'll just call the neutral people. They don't know much about refugees, maybe scared to ask, listening to the hardline racist people, but also trying to listen to the humanitarians and the NGOs who work in the community. And so I feel it's my job to try to educate that middle group of people. And I find that if you spend some time talking to them about the humanitarian aspect, that's important, but also talking about the contributions that immigrants and refugees make to our society. So simple things like, over the lifetime, because most people migrate before their 30th birthday, they're going to have a huge, long labor market experience in my country. And so even though it's really expensive to bring people here and help them settle, in the long term, they're going to pay more in taxes, they become more healthy, so they're not going to have as many health problems as they did. So the taxes that they pay over the lifetime will be more than the money that Canadians put towards them to bring them here in the first place. So they're an economic positive for my country. That message doesn't get out very often. And so that's a message that resonates with people. The other message that resonates is, if we talk about crime rates and terrorism, because we hear about that kind of stuff, if you bring the data to the people, they'll begin to understand, like, there's no connection between being an immigrant and a terrorist, or being a refugee and a terrorist. And that in my country and in most other countries, because of the selection process, it's very likely that immigrants and refugees have significantly lower crime rates than people who are born in Canada. And so if you bring that kind of data and that kind of factual evidence, you're not going to convince the racist people. That kind of evidence is not going to resonate with that group of people. But that huge group of people in the middle who just doesn't want to learn a little bit more, too scared to ask questions, that's the group of people that are highly influenceable and educationable, and we can bring them over to the side of being more accepting.
Well, Lori, it's been so wonderful talking with you. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Armenia and the Aurora Prize.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
I mean, do you think that is a communication challenge, or is it an education, a knowledge barrier to that? Or, I mean, how, if in fact it's an economic challenge, but people's perceptions are actually not the reality, is this an awareness? Is it communication? Is it strategically, all of that? Or what's most important yeah.
I mean, I think others also should.
Yeah, no, please, but I mean,
voice their opinions. So, but all of that and more.
Eric, I'm wondering if you might talk about the role of
It's your turn.
Oh, it's my turn.
Yeah, because we all did it.
So, just to introduce ourselves?
Yeah.
Okay, my name is Lori Wilkinson, and I'm a professor in the sociology department at the University of Manitoba, and we're located in Winnipeg, which is the geographic center of North America, and also the birthplace of Winnie the Pooh. I'm also the editor of the Journal of International Migration and Integration, and I run a research center called Immigration Research West.
Immigration Research
West.
Yes. Tackle that question. How can we galvanize?
Can you read it again for us?
It says, how can we galvanize societies to empower refugees rather than pushing them to the margin?
80% of the films can be shot in Jordan, and one thing I really want to do is employ as many refugees as I can. And I've been talking to my producers in Jordan, because there's scenes of their Zord, there's production assistants. I want to create maybe 10 paid internships for refugee students that can come and work on the job, work on the set, eat with us, sit with us, break bread, work. I want to get my hands dirty. I'm very suspicious of people in high towers and Facebook philosophers. You know, I want to throw down Jarf al-Darwawish and Wadi Araba, Wadi Rum, speaking with the Bedouins. I just want to get my hands dirty, and I think that's the best example is to get in there and not be afraid, take off the gloves, and really create an impetus for change by letting people know that they matter. We're in a very, I mean, we're talking about some of the most incredible human beings that we're seeing these last 2 days, right? And I come from an industry where all their heroes fall out of the sky. They're superheroes, but these are the superheroes. These are the people that are working on, they're at the razor's edge. So I just want to be able to contribute to that. And my only ulterior motive is creating jobs, because the limbo is, if you want to wish the worst upon your enemy, wish them limbo, wish them. And that is exactly what I've been seeing in so many places that I've been traveling through in this region. Is there's this incredible sense of stasis and stagnation, and men who come from patriarchal societies who have lost their center of gravity. They cannot bring home the bread anymore, and they're emasculated. They're devastated, and that leads to violence, that leads to alcoholism, that leads to everything. And so for me, it's just very simple: is to use whatever means I have to be able to create jobs that help people define their voices as storytellers, because without that human touch, without that specificity of narrative, we cannot in any way, shape or form find a tangible way of change, because everything now has become, you know, kind of from the wide angle lens. From afar, we're seeing everything, and we're all Facebook philosophers. But it's time to really kind of zoom in and get into the close-up of these people's lives, and hopefully give them the technology to be able to, you know, give voice to their stories, and hopefully that will inspire all.
We should afford them every single possible benefit that we can within the norms of where, you know, you're offering them a job, and allow them to succeed, allow them to move up, allow them to become the people they are, because these were people that had maybe great jobs, they were community leaders, they had wealth, they have education, so you cannot sort of press them down. And this is how our philosophy is, the philosophy of Haidun, the philosophy of our company, Supply, and it works, it helps.
I mean,
there is how do you make sure that is clear to the general public?
We talk about it. We talk about it. It's the only thing we can say. I mean, through Haidun, we're actually, we hold symposiums, or we try to, you know, spread the word, talk to them, the newcomers, and tell them that, you know, they have every single right just like everyone else. But more importantly, I think my husband and myself, we go around and we tell people, we tell our company owners that no, don't apply for grants. That's not why we're hiring these people. We're hiring them because they are good workers, they're good people. And we don't need special government grants to help pay their salaries. No, if they're good, they're going to work out. If they're not good, well, they're going to have to move on. They have to prove themselves, but you have to open that door for them. And dissemination, that's it.
Yeah. There's a, I mean, the Canadians are the model for the whole world. But of course, there's one big difference. You are an immigration country, and you have clear rules, and you select the people you let in. And then all the processes following you are describing, and it's great how you integrate people. And I mean, we try to join your model all the time. Nevertheless, in Europe, we had the situation that people are coming; they are just coming. So some try to build walls, also in America. Others try to find ways
how to invite them or how to keep them far away in Africa or maybe in Turkey, but please not in Europe. So we are dealing with big numbers and with a real migration wave. But all you've said is totally right. We have to integrate them into the labor market. We have to enable them, and we have to be fast in doing so. Yes. There's no time to lose. And of course, there are a lot of obstacles because they don't have the diploma you would accept, let's say, in Germany or in France, but they have kind of diplomas nobody
has heard
knows,
of,
or they don't have papers at all. So you have to go by competence instead of certifications. And so you have to find ways how to bring them into the labor market. But as soon as they are into it, it really works. I mean, we have a long-lasting experience with guest workers, how they have been called. They never left, but everybody expects.
When it comes to refugees fleeing the war and coming into a country, like the Syrians, the money they make, they will spend it in the same country. Whereas with migration, you know that there's a lot of remittances sent back home, so the hard currency leaves the country, which is not something bad. It's just for refugees.
It's a very different economic dynamic.
Yes, but it's very interesting how in the same countries, migration is seen as okay. And foreign migrants are brought in, they are taxed, and then they send remittances home. And that model, for some reason, is accepted.
It's respectable.
And is accepted by the host country, whereas for refugees, there's a scare that the refugees will take the jobs of. So I think that also breaking the...
One is not.
And stemming from what you said, communication is key. How do we communicate? I think we need to go back to facts and be able to articulate those facts using economic figures, etc. But it's also politics. It's not only the facts, it's also how willing is the government, how enlightened are the ones who are making decisions to see an opportunity as opposed to a threat. And something was said about the pressure of civil society. I think that's very important. I think part of the difficulties we have in our region is the weakened civil society. And concepts of tolerance and equality and equity and gender equity and equality are not necessarily so prevalent. So you also don't have a secular, strong civil society calling for saying we are all alike, we're all humans. That drive, I think, also would help. If we could create more of a strong civil society, it would help pressure.
I'm wondering for some of the students, what of this conversation makes sense to you? What resonates with your own thoughts?
Yeah, when I think of refugees, I always
Welcome to CivilNet Backstage at the Aurora Dialogues. My guest here right now is Eric Nazarian, who's a filmmaker and a storyteller and a fellow at the USC Institute of Armenian Studies. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Susie.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Eric, you're a filmmaker, a storyteller. How do you communicate trauma, disaster, crisis in this day and age to be able to galvanize the world, which is today's theme at the Aurora Dialogues?
Wow, that's a massive spaceship of a question. I'll do my best. I mean, I think any act of storytelling, if it's any good, has an element of conscience and sincerity to it. And ultimately, if it's meant to travel across the world, then it has a universal theme, which is a human theme. So I think what's happening here is unprecedented in this region, really, to bring these many amazing human beings, change makers, you know, who are on the ground granularly making change. It's incredibly inspiring. I think as a storyteller, working now on Chris Bojalian's magnificent novel, The Sandcastle Girls, making it into a film, putting together the pieces of the story, since I'll be shooting in the Middle East and since I've spent enough time in the Middle East, it's just really haunting to see the parallels between what Aurora Mardiganian went through 100 years ago and now what the Yazidis and the Syrian refugees are going through. all the people that have been killed, all the people that are rushing to their aid, trying to create home. So I think storytelling is fundamental in that it gives a human voice to the statistic. And this is very important, to never think of just people in millions, but to think of people as children, as mothers, as sisters, as brothers, as uncles, people with dialysis, people with lymphoma. You know, these are regular people who are refugees. So I think the biggest sin that I've seen happen since the Syrian war is that there's been this incredible animosity toward refugees trying to cross to Europe. And that's something that honest to God, I can't wrap my head around. So as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, if there's any chance I get to make movies in this region or in Europe, I'm going to try my best to employ refugees in some capacity, whether it's a paid internship or it's, you know, a production assistant on the film, but anything, because this is the biggest crisis we're facing humanity right now.
As a filmmaker, you're an individual. What we see in the Aurora Humanitarian Index a few days ago when it came out is that individual efforts are rated as the lowest in impacting, or people think that they're the least useful in impacting large-scale humanitarian crises. They give more weight to international institutions, governments. What is the role of individuals, and how do you think they make an impact? Do you agree with that? You probably don't.
I think the role of an individual is to be able to be heard, that every individual has a voice, and every individual has a conscience, and every individual has imagination, and every capable individual capable of making change can do so in granular ways. You know, we can't think of the ocean just as one body of water. There are billions and quadrillions of drops. And what is humanity but composed of individuals? I think we've forgotten the power of individuality in our times. We forget that no two human beings will ever be the same. And that doesn't mean that I'm better than you or you're better than me. It means that we have a duty with this short amount of time we have on this earth to create some impetus for good. I mean, that's the end game. You know, I think institutions and governments, unfortunately, have become very lazy in recent years. And one of the ladies speaking today, you know, said something to the effect that, you know, governments don't make innovation unless they're pushed into it. So you have to keep pushing, and you have to keep being critical. I think the problem nowadays is, you know, governments are not taking a concerted effort to listening and hearing people out on the street who are in the trenches fighting the good fight. Everything is done from high towers. I want to see statesmen who have the guts and the balls to go into the trenches and be able to walk the walk and see the reality. You know, as that old saying, come and see, instead of sitting in a high castle and create policy that may or may not affect. But if there's a child dying of, you know, kidney failure, that their high tower means nothing to me.
And what gives you hope?
People who have a conscience, like these people who have been nominated for the Aurora Prize. I mean, I've choked up like 20 times in the past 2 days because of seeing the unprecedented odds they face. The ladies from Somalia, you know, Miss Jamila from Afghanistan, Tom Katena in the Nuba Mountains. I mean, Marguerite Barankitz in what she's done with Burundi. I mean, these people are facing odds that you will never be able to imagine. So the more and more I see and hear their stories, the less I ever want to complain about anything.
Thank you. Welcome back to CivilNet Live at the backstage at the Aurora Dialogues. My name is Susanna Petrosian, and my guest here is Pamela Altab-Shirani. I hope I said that right.
Yes.
She's a student at the United World Colleges in Dilijan, Armenia, where the Aurora Dialogues with the theme of galvanizing the world is currently taking place. Pamela, how do the students look at all of this happening in the school?
I think for us, a lot of, like, in many senses, these Aurora Dialogues are happening in our school on a daily basis, but on a much smaller scale. They happen usually randomly without any, you know, without anything being forced. And like having this, I think, in our schools, I think it's quite special because I think we can give a lot in terms of a student body and like youth participating in these things that are like these very, very big topic and very heavy issues. Specifically, not just alone, but like with other very influential people, I think, and people with very strong and really very different opinions. And in many senses, I think this really fits in well with Aurora and our mission and Aurora's mission. And I think they really like complement each other in a nice way. And having these dialogues and these events at our school, I think, in some way, we are receiving as much as we are giving from everything that we've learned over these past 2 years at school.
And as I mentioned, today's theme is galvanizing the world. Do you think the students have responsibility in that?
I think there's a lot of responsibility put upon us. I think as UWC students or students with kind of like a moral awareness of what we need to do and with that what's within our ability to change the world or to change something that needs changing. And yeah, for sure. I think it's a responsibility a lot of us really take on with pleasure. I think we want to do it, and it's not something, of course, it's a heavy burden, but it's a burden that we need to carry to be able to sustain our living in many ways.
Have you seen the Aurora Humanitarian Index? It says that young people, the survey says that young people are the most hopeful of individual actions impacting the refugee crisis or humanitarian crisis in general. Why do you think is that? Because most other age groups don't believe in that. They believe that institutions and governments have a bigger role.
I think
what motivates you guys?
I think as young people, I think in many ways generations are changing in terms of opinions and in terms of how globalized we're becoming. And I think maybe our age group at this point, one of these is being at a UWC. One of the reasons why our age group is a bit more empathetic, I think, to the refugee crisis is because we're much more globalized and we see more, and we can be able to we are able to put it to be in other people's shoes, and I think
sympathize and empathize.
Sympathize and just really pushes us to do something. And I feel like a lot with adults, they feel like a lot of what we might be doing might be hopeless or something that's very insignificant or something that you just look away from as it doesn't really affect you. But yeah, I think with our age group, we're able to empathize a lot more.
Okay, thank you, Pamela. We'll let you get back to the dialogues.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. We'll be back with more with CivilNet Backstage at the Dialogues. Thank you.
I'm here with Levon Afeyan, CEO of Seatply Corporation, based out of Canada. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
I want you to start by talking about what you do at your company, and if you can just give us a brief background.
Of course. We're located in Montreal. We manufacture curb plywood, which is a major component in commercial seating. So we produce chairs, majoritively, for fast food restaurants, food courts, theaters, hospitals, offices, and things like that.
And many of your employees are recently arrived to Canada or refugees. What inspired you to take this approach, and can you just talk a little bit about how it's worked out for you and your company?
Our workforce is predominantly newcomers. We've had a number of different countries represented in different waves. Initially in the late 70s, early 80s, we had the wave of Lebanese that arrived. Then we had the Iranians and the Orientals. We had Vietnamese and Sri Lankans and Indians, etc. Up until recently, of course. So our workforce, we got used to working with this workforce, who are very talented, yet challenged with some language issues and others. Of course, the recent refugee crisis that we had with the Syrians forced us to think about what we can do to help in that situation. And we started hiring a few, and it coincided with a time where we needed to hire a lot of people. It was in a time of expansion. So one thing led to another. We had a lot of applications, and we devised a way of actually hiring them, grouping them together with others who spoke either Arabic or majoritively Armenian. And we formed groups. We formed them into teams, and within the next 6 or 9 months, we were over 40 Syrians in their factory. And so now, presently, they represent about a third of the workforce. And
And what have been some of the major challenges you've faced?
The major challenge is always language, initially. But that's a challenge that's easily overcome. With the time, they learn. We help them with understanding the language. The real challenges are more their attitudes and their understanding, their psychological reflections about themselves and where they're at. They need to get over certain issues. The concept that they're in Canada permanently. They're not going back. This is something that we cannot talk about yet with them. Very slowly. A lot of them still wondering when the war stops, they're going to go back, and etc. Some of them are trying to go back right now to save some of the lands and buildings that they owned. The other issue that they have is that they've come from an area where they were successful people. They had their businesses, they had good jobs, they had careers, they had professions. And now in a country like Canada, they need to start from zero. So the sense of pride of a family, the man of the family who needs to support, where they're in a country they can't even read or write the language, it's a traumatic experience. So they need to very quickly establish themselves as the breadwinners of the family to be able to come home with a certain amount of pride and honor that's so very important in our culture in the East. Those are challenges that we need to always work with. So we help them integrate. We provide them with French courses at the work environment. We provide them with coaching about how to come to work. For example, they've never heard of carpooling, which is something very common for us. They never imagined that they can work from 4 in the afternoon till midnight and go home at midnight because it's a second shift. So we help them to understand that there's opportunities and things. And at the end, they become excellent workers.
And what are some of the
distinctive characteristics of your approach, and do you think that your methods could be replicated elsewhere?
You see, we never actually set out planning. We did things naturally. It evolved. But when we reflect back on what we did, first of all, we never treat them as refugees or newcomers. We treat them as equal to everybody else. We specifically refused, for example, to take any grants from the government who would, for example, pay 50% of their first 6 months of work to promote. That is not something that I believe is a cause or a reason to hire people. Our approach was hire who you need, put a lot of time in training them, have a bit of patience for some of the oddities that they represent with you, and make sure they understand that they're responsible, that you're not hiring them for half a salary, you hire them for full salary, and pay them fairly. This is something that a lot of companies seem to find odd. They find this as an opportunity to hire people at a low rate. They're newcomers, they don't speak the language, we can get them to work them for free, for cheap. In turn, I believe that it's the opposite we should do. We should promote them quicker, we should accelerate their raises quicker, make them feel comfortable with the salaries they earn. And in return, I believe that the work that they provide to us is of a much higher caliber, and you earn their trust on the long term and they stay with you. So it is I think we are the winners, not them, more than anything else.
You just participated here at Aurora in a panel about refugee integration. What were some of the big takeaways from that?
It is obvious that integration into a country is a double-edged sword. The refugees need to learn to integrate into society, but at the same time, society needs to learn to integrate them. Where I come from in Canada, we seem to be a very welcoming country, but we lack in our skills of integration. We welcome them, we open our doors, we bring them in, but there's a lot of integration need to be handled with. There's a new level of racism, which is not against color or creed or religion. It's about a new racism against refugees. We have this new concept. And some of the newcomers are faced with a double sword. Not only do they look different or have a different religion, now they're also branded as refugees. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done by the state to promote this concept, to help the locals understand that these are new and permanent members of our society. And once the citizens of the country understand that these are the permanent members of our society, and then we work on the newcomers saying that you are here on a permanent basis, then we will start talking to each other and getting along. I give the example of some of my employees. I tell them, guys, you may be a Syrian today and your children are Syrian, but you will be the grandfather of a Canadian. So you don't have grandchildren yet, but you will be the grandfather. So start becoming a Canadian so you can be a good grandfather. And that model, I believe, will work much better once we accept that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Welcome back to CivilNet Backstage at Aurora Dialogues. My name is Susanna Petrosian, and my guest here is Pablo Seriani Cernadas from Buenos Aires. Mr. Cernadas is an attorney, a professor of human rights, and the vice chair of the UN Committee on the Rights of Migrant Workers and Their Families. Welcome, Pablo.
Thank you.
Pablo, the challenges of the humanitarian crisis are so great today in so many levels, in so many locations. Should the work, the impact, the efforts, should they be focused on providing humanitarian relief to the families and the refugees, or should they be focused on finding political solutions to the crisis?
I would say both. I mean, both are critical and they complement each other, because you could provide relief in the short term to those who are in a very vulnerable circumstances. But although if there is no policy solution, political commitment that understand and address these kind of challenges with a long-term lens and a comprehensive approach, I mean, that relief is not enough. I mean, it's just temporary. Those people, I mean, and behind those people are more people that might end up in the same circumstances. So we need to have both approaches, and I would say that the long term and the political commitment is paramount. It's key. I mean, for properly and effectively addressing these, I would say, unfortunately, structural problems that the world is dealing with nowadays.
What types of structural problems?
Well, poverty, asymmetries between countries and regions, unemployment, lack of opportunities, discrimination based on gender, ethnic origin, religious, age, or sexual orientation, nationality, migration status, and political violence, social violence, the way that natural resources has been exploited and displacing so many people from their own communities because of the lack of opportunities, and so in that context, how those displacements are being responded by transit and destination countries. So I think that we are dealing with this kind of structural issues, and unless we address them, I mean, through political commitment, through empathy, through multiple partnerships, I mean, the situation that we are facing, the problems, the armed conflicts, violence, terrorism, racism, xenophobia, maybe increase in the next decades.
If we're talking specifically about migration, what are the key forces standing in the way of finding a solution? Is it economic anxiety? Is it fear of demographic change in certain countries? What are the key issues people are worried about?
Well, I mean, I would say there are at least two main challenges. One is in relation with what I was saying is the root causes that these kind of structural factors that are pushing people for fleeing from the country, and second is the narrative. It's the narrative of migration. I mean, how migration is presented to the society, and this is such a toxic narrative and based on myth rather than facts, rather than what migration in reality is, which is people, families, cultures, people seeking jobs, seeking opportunities, people that to some extent also are a necessity also for destination countries, because we witness, and there's large evidence on how host society are benefit from migrants on many levels, economic level, at work, labor market, and many other ways. But
So is there a communication problem? We've spoken to a few people today who lead, whether it's governmental or non-governmental organizations, and I asked them how do you communicate trauma, disaster, crisis, mass migration,
there is a
to gain that type of necessary support you were talking about for political commitment and.
Yeah, of course there is a communication problem. I mean, and that problem is also related with the lack of information. I mean, information in terms of public policy aim at developing or gathering information about migration, about migrants' living conditions in host society, about why they are fleeing from their country. So as that information is missing in many countries, then migration policies is built based on stereotypes, based of myths, and that is leading to xenophobia, is leading to restriction of rights, the rights of migrants, in spite of that providing them the same rights than others in the same society. It clearly increases the number of benefits, not only for migrants and their families, but also to the entire host society. So I think it's a problem of communication, lack of information, lack of commitment. Then also that migration has increasingly become a political tool. So and it's seen through such a narrow lens. I mean, security lens. I mean, being targeting migrants as a security threat, or as a threat to the cultural identities, or a threat to employment of native population. So this narrow approach is framing migration policy with a, I mean, and without highlighting or visible, even making visible what migration in reality is.
And how do you motivate young people to create a community or an ecosystem for involvement, education, action? Is that something your organization
yes, you need multi-stakeholder initiatives. I mean, because it's integration, for instance, ensuring migrants' integration to society is not an unidirectional issue. I mean, it's multi-directional. So we all integrate each other. I mean, in our societies, because society that increasingly has become multicultural. I mean, this is now. I mean, and it will be. Our society will be like this, and it will be an increasing trend in terms of becoming more and more multicultural. So, so integration implies a number of policies involved in different directions. So we all integrate each other, but also implies the participation of different stakeholders: civil society, teachers, health servants, media.
In fact, one of the panels of the Aurora Dialogues tomorrow is migration from crisis to integration, involving all of those various multidimensional steps you're talking about.
Exactly, because I mean, in many countries, unfortunately, you see that migration policy is framed just, I mean, it's just regulating, whether a person can come to the country, can stay, and to which extent they can access to some rights, while migration policy should not only be about entering to a country or whether they should be locked in a detention center. I mean, migration policy should be under, for instance, the labor ministry, the social protection ministry, child protection bodies, health, education, justice. I mean, because migration is multidimensionality, and that should be reflected in migration policy. Otherwise, I mean, we are using the wrong tools, and in any case, when we talk about public policies, if we use, I mean, if we have a narrow picture of a reality, a particular reality, a policy trying to address that reality will fail.
Right.
Because, I mean, they are not looking about what this issue is.
And you specifically work with migrant workers, correct? And what are the largest challenges facing them today?
Well, there are a number of challenges. One of them is the increasing number of situations where migrants end up in exploitation environment, labor exploitation. Not the lack of policies aimed at protecting the rights of migrants and ensuring the equal treatment as any other worker.
Is there a model in the world to look at?
Well, I mean,
we wouldn't call it a success case because it's hardly probably exists, but
yeah, I mean, pieces, different pieces or positive pieces of what it should be an effective and legitimate migration policy. One is to try to reduce the number of mechanisms that have been increasing undocumented migration. I mean, trying to promote regularization. Regularization is a key for integration, for social integration, for reducing exploitation, for reducing gender violence, child labor. So trying to facilitate that those people that are living undocumented in the country of destination, they can access to a regular status, because in that sense it facilitates the access to labor market, to better living conditions, and so on. And secondly is trying to promote that migrants become just as another part of society, and so they can be members of different kind of associations, trade unions. So workers are workers no matter where they were born, I mean, no matter their ethnic origin and so on. So there's some policies that went in that direction, and they succeed.
And what motivates you to do your work?
The motivation is that we should get rid of our some ways of building identity that exclude other people, and I think that nationality, I mean, we don't decide where we are born. I mean, this is the lottery of birth. I mean, we are born in a particular region, but that cannot be cannot define who we are, who or mainly which rights should be entitled to. I mean, so I think that working on migration and working on migrants' rights is a privilege, in the sense that we can see each other as just human beings with the same rights, no matter anything else. I mean, because until today, nationality has been used even. That is a 19th century issue. I mean, until now, where migration became a structural phenomenon of our society and our future, we are still thinking of nationality as something that excludes others instead of, I mean, building other building bridges, no, that could just see where we could all see each other as equal, just because we are human beings.
Well, we could have a whole another conversation about identity, but we'll finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching CivilNet Backstage at Aurora. We'll be back with more. Thank you.
I'm here with Nilu, who's an international student studying at Dilijan here from Iran, and her mother's also joining us. And so we're very excited to have you today on CivilNet, and want to know a little bit about what's going on here today and why you're here.
Oh, thank you. We are here for two reasons, mainly first for our daughter's graduation, of course, after 2 years of very hard work here, and then for this very exciting event, Aurora Prizing, which I heard right just after we received the invitation for graduation. I see about, and I go and look for what is this Aurora thing about all. And today I heard a lot more about the prize, which was, the idea was really interesting for us. And we hope as individuals that we could help a bit more for this idea to be spread over the world by ourselves.
Can you tell me a little bit, as a student, what does the Aurora Prize mean to you, and what does Aurora Dialogues mean? You know, we're here on your campus and there are so many international guests. What does the general student body feel?
It's actually quite interesting, because I think it was, for me, the first time I was exposed to a humanitarian act, if you will, on such a large scale, and then to sort of see it firsthand, and to sort of see how it's happening and how it's put together. I think for me it was quite interesting, especially as I want to sort of, in the future, hopefully get into fields of development or humanitarian work. And also I think it's a very unique opportunity to have the platform of the international students, because I think the issues that are discussed here are obviously hugely global. But then the problem that I think mostly occurs when discussing these issues is that the point of views are usually quite homogenous, and so it's quite the discussion doesn't really lead anywhere. And to have people, which I've been experiencing for 2 years, to have people with completely different points of views and coming together, and that's, I feel like, when the discussion starts going somewhere, because you incorporate all the different perspectives. And I think that's something quite valuable and something that probably doesn't happen in another setting.
The Aurora Dialogues and the Aurora Prize really puts a lot of its efforts into the youth, and they really consider the youth as the cornerstone to their efforts. What types of opportunities are presented to you as a student here at Dilijan to get involved?
I think probably the most valuable one was just being here, just having the privilege of being exposed to just so many different realities, and sort of understanding them without so many filters that they may have gone through had I been elsewhere in the world, and to sort of have the chance to simply get the raw facts and try to make up my own mind based on the actual people I saw and based on the actual stories that I heard. So I think for me that was probably the most, and I think that's probably the most valuable thing that you can get as a person living in a 21st century world. Because there is so much there is this illusion of understanding, but there is not the actual understanding until you come together and until you go through the frustrations and the complexities of actually living with other people's reality and trying to overcome that.
So why UWC Dilijan? I mean, there are so many international schools. What was it about this school, about Armenia, that made you comfortable enough to have your daughter move out?
I would tell you about two main points. One about Armenia, as we are from Iran and Armenia is our good neighbor, so the distance was so close, and it was really a good privilege for us because we could come and go here very easily, and the peoples are really nice, and so everything is really comfortable for us to let our daughter to come and study here. And UWC, I myself am not familiar with UWC very much previously. When Nilu told us about the college and the concept, and when we studied the values of UWC, which was really valuable things that the founders are just trying to convey the whole world about the peace and the, total communities and so on. So that was really interesting for us to just send our children to a place that everybody would care about peace and environmental things, and so which are the main issues in these days' worlds.
So what's next for you after graduation today, and also how do you think you're going to use this as a jumping board to fulfill your professional wants?
I think this place has definitely changed my priorities and also my plans to a huge extent, mainly because sort of back home, college has a very different connotation, and sort of the implications that come with, so you go somewhere for 4 years, you study, and then, you get a job. But then for me, so when I came here, it was the first time that I got exposed to the idea of a gap year, and to sort of the things that I could do other than straight off sort of continuing being in the sort of academic world. And so I am working on the idea of trying to put together a quite meaningful gap year for next year. And after that, sort of going to uni. But I think this place has definitely been very influential in sort of my idea of my education and how I want it to be something that I chose actively rather than it being something instrumental to sort of the next stages of my life. Yeah.
Do you think the Aurora initiatives do you think that you'll continue with any parts of that? Is there an opportunity for the alumni network to assist you with job placement or making the most out of your gap year? Have you had discussions about that?
Not very deeply, but I think just the fact that we are all here and we've had personal contacts with so many people that I normally would probably not even have heard of, and to sort of to sort of hear about what they're doing, and then sort of it gives you the privilege of having this huge network all over the world, and which makes doing whatever you want to do in the next stages a lot easier, because you have all these resources and you can just sort of like, you know, okay, I want to do this, but I don't know how. I'm gonna contact my friend in whatever, in Denmark, or like, you know, whatever, in Sweden, and just sort of pull it together in that way. So I think that's probably the most, and also again with the Aurora prizes, because of the people we met today and the sort of the ideas that we've been exposed to. So I think in that sense, just for me, just the exposition is, I think, the most valuable thing that I could probably take from here for the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to CivilNet. We are continuing our interviews, CivilNet Backstage at Aurora, with some of the very interesting people with incredible CVs and life experiences in this very sphere: humanitarian work, refugees, asylum. And we're going to be speaking now with Sarah Ignatius, who is the executive director of the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research in Boston, Massachusetts, NASR. Except that we're going to speak with Sarah not with her NASR hat on, but another hat. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you, Sophie.
So we're going to talk because in your former life, you were an attorney working specifically on immigration cases, asylum cases. And I don't know if this is putting you on the spot, but I think the whole world knows this. On the one hand, we've got this beautiful Statue of Liberty that says, "Give me your masses." And on the other hand, immigration policy in the U.S. today certainly isn't so great, but what about in the past?
Yes, I'm glad you put it that way, because if we're talking strictly about refugees, and a lot of the sessions today have been about that, the United States, in order to admit a refugee, that person has been approved abroad. They've gone through endless screenings. It's about a 2-year process, but the numbers that are allowed to come in are restricted every year, set by the president. And so that number is probably no more than 75,000, and perhaps now it's even lower than that. So that's a cap. And of that amount, it's then subdivided by regions of the world. So way back when, say in the 1980s, when El Salvador and Guatemala had massive civil rights violations, and death squads operating freely, sometimes even out of government buildings, entire villages being razed to the ground in Guatemala, indigenous villages that no longer exist. Nearly all of the refugee numbers for Latin America, and the numbers at that time were only around 3,000, something like that, for all of Latin America. Almost all of those were reserved for people fleeing from Cuba. And so you had just a handful of Salvadorans and Guatemalans who...
Even though they were the ones in need.
Absolutely. So the U.S. refugee policy, the admission numbers are really a reflection of U.S. foreign policy goals and interests, and not so much a reflection of the actual danger that people are facing.
So if we take that issue of policy, accepting them, allowing them into country is point one. And then there are all of the other issues that come after that, that lead to integration. Mm-hmm. Because if they're here seeking asylum, they're not just a temporary refugee.
Well, there are a couple points on that. So the people who enter as refugees in the United States enter with refugee status, meaning they're entering in a form of legal status. And they do receive government benefits in the sense of helping with housing. They come with work authorization. They can access many social services. What I was doing was representing people seeking political asylum. The legal standard is the same. You have to show that you either have already suffered persecution or fear it on account of only one of 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Frequently, people who fear harm based on political opinion make up the majority of asylum cases. But those people have no legal status. They are asylum seekers. They don't even get work authorization. So it's a completely different track. It's, talk about ungenerous, as you were suggesting initially with the opening question. It's people who would never have left their home countries if they weren't in fear for their lives, because they don't get anything by coming to the United States other than the right to apply for political asylum. And that process can take years sometimes with the backlog. So it's a very, very difficult situation, and we felt exceedingly honored. In my previous job, we were training pro bono attorneys, attorneys from private law firms, to represent these clients without charge, because they really have nothing and their lives are at risk. So it was exceedingly meaningful work for the lawyers, and obviously of immense value to the people.
And no longer just El Salvador and Guatemala.
No, not at all. No, in the Boston area, the clients were from throughout the world, probably over 75, 80, 90 countries. Any place that you can imagine. From reading the newspaper, we had clients, and so it would be many countries in Africa as well as Asia, but definitely around the world.
So one last question. The environment in the world today is such that everybody's talking about the issue of migration, whether it's for refugees, whether it's voluntary migrants, labor migrants. Migration is one of the topics. The fact that that is so, does that change the situation in the U.S. at all, the approach of the United States government?
I haven't seen it. If anything, with our current president, I think things have gotten far more polarized. I think some of his statements have led to people being even more polarized, even more anti-immigrant. Even in Massachusetts, which has an extremely welcoming attitude towards immigration, individuals have from foreign countries have experienced levels of hate speech against them that they never experienced even just a year ago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope that we can continue to hear each other and learn from each other, and together make change, have an impact in the humanitarian situation, which is the message of Aurora after all. Thank you, and stay with CivilNet as we speak very soon with Hovik Etemesian, who represents the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Mosul, Iraq, today. And that is a task that I suspect is going to require a whole lot of questions and description, because it is, in fact, at the core of conflicts that, in fact, caused the refugee and migration situation that we're all speaking about. Stay with CivilNet Backstage at Aurora.
Here with two volunteers for the Aurora Dialogues, and I want to ask you to tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm Mariam. I'm studying in Dilijan High School. I'm 14.
I am Ellen. I am 16. I study in Dilijan High School.
So tell me why you're here volunteering today. Why is this important to you?
We're from Dilijan, and I think it is so important to do something for your region, for your people, and something good.
And we are like this work to help people.
How has today been for you? Tell me a little bit about what you've been doing, and if you've met anybody cool. Is this what you thought the volunteer experience was going to be like?
For me, it is a great day. Aurora, it is international project, and I think it is so important to be to stay here, UWC, today.
That's great. Thank you.
Welcome back. We're going to speak here at CivilNet Backstage at Aurora with Hovik Etemesian, who just left Mosul, Iraq a couple of days ago, and I assume is going back to Mosul, Iraq in a couple of days. Hovik, thank you for giving us the time. You are the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, head of office in Mosul. I'm not even going to ask you, or maybe I am, what you do every day, but first tell us how you got there. Very quickly, what was your life trajectory? You're born in Beirut.
And then I did my master's at the University for Peace in Costa Rica.
And why and how did you do that? Armenians are supposed to become doctors, lawyers, engineers.
Yeah, I failed. I failed
in all of
the
them.
Armenian standard. I was doing political science at Haigazian University in Lebanon and was working for a human rights NGO. And then through that work, I found this master's program on gender and peace building at University for Peace. So a few months later, I applied and then went to Costa Rica.
And then?
And then worked on a few projects, journalism, rule of law, and then went back to Lebanon. War started in 2006, and I joined the UNHCR. And ever since, I've been traveling.
Immediately prior to this position, you were in Jordan.
Yes.
And you were?
Managing Zaatari camp.
The Zaatari camp. Yes. With how many residents, refugees?
Around 80,000 refugees inside Zaatari camp, and we had an equal number in the urban setting in Mafraq.
Okay, so in 25 words or less, what does that mean, managing an 80,000 person refugee camp?
Well, it's not a one person's undertaking. It's a team of not only UNHCR but different UN agencies, humanitarian organizations, and the Jordanian government. So we work all together. So how large is this team? I would say more than 1,000 from government and non-government and UN. We all work together to be able to cater to 80,000 people.
And what do you do? What does that mean? Does it mean providing education, medical, hair, jobs, or does it mean providing water and trash pickup? I mean, what does it really mean?
I mean, camps for us are the last solution always, because they're in a camp setting, it's less dignified, and you need to basically provide everything. So from what you mentioned, shelter, water, food, all of the basics, electricity, all of the basics need to be provided for people to get by. But it's also more than that. It's education, as you said. And again, this is UNHCR, UNICEF, WFP, and other organizations all working together. But it's also, there's that element of dealing with the future of the population. So whereas you have the day-to-day tasks of provision of services, but there are also issues of employment, work opportunities. I spend a lot of time, including today, on WhatsApp and Facebook chatting with refugees to see a little bit what are the news, what do they need, what are their ideas. So there's also a lot of that soft interaction and the worry about the future.
You said when we first spoke that there are three needs: return, resettlement, and integration in the local new environment. So at the camp level, where are we?
Well, we have some returning from the camp back to Syria. And also we have to remind ourselves that most refugees are outside of camps. So when I speak of refugees, I don't want to restrict myself to the camp setting. Most of the ones actually who we don't hear about are outside of camps, away from the eyes of the media and the cameras. So refugees in general, Syrian refugees in Jordan, some of them are returning to Syria, not because things are better in Syria, but they reach a point where they spend the money that they have saved. They don't have enough opportunities to cater to their families. And I remember one of the refugees who was leaving Zaatari, and he was actually working as a daily worker with us. He was leaving, so he came to my office, said goodbye, and I said, but why are you leaving? I mean, you're one of the ones who's working a little bit. And he said, we are dying slowly here, so might as well go back, try to live or die quickly. So I think it's when we think about this, we also need to think about, what are the perspectives for the future for Syrians. So return is happening, but not in the best conditions. There are some refugees who are being resettled.
Resettled means where?
Resettled to third countries like the US and other countries.
Not where, okay.
That's what resettlement is.
Okay.
And local integration is if they stay in the country and they're integrated. We are not talking about, at this stage, the local integration. The war is not over. We hopefully will see an end to the war soon, and then see how the refugees want to lead their lives post-war. I think earlier today there was discussion about how those three solutions affect only 2% of the refugee population. It's also partly due to the fact that conflicts are not ending. So if we end conflicts, then that's a starter for durable solutions for refugees, because most of the time return is a real part of the process. But if you don't end the conflict in Syria, how do you expect Syrian refugees to return?
So before we conclude, and we're not ready to conclude, I want to talk in two different directions. One is to understand better what one does in Mosul when the conflict is in fact raging around you. And the other is to try to understand how humanitarian aid, this fatigue, the global sense of fatigue, apathy, that which the humanitarian index, the Aurora Humanitarian Index indicates is growing, not decreasing, how all of that affects not just your work, but affects the refugees themselves, mentally, psychologically, emotionally. Let's talk about Mosul first, though. What does that mean in a daily conflict-raging environment?
Well, in Mosul we have done a few things. One is that we had to build, unfortunately, because this is a last resort, camps for internally displaced closer to Mosul, so that Iraqis who are fleeing Mosul can find shelter and basic assistance in the camps. So over the past few months we built 2 camps. One of them is full already with around 25,000 Iraqis. Another one is filling every day. There are other camps also in various parts of the country receiving IDPs. So part of it is that camp-based effort to assist. We have transit center where IDPs stay the night and then transferred to camps. We also have an outreach inside Mosul to look at the protection environment of civilians, provide assistance where they are. East of Mosul, we have a lot of Iraqis who left West Mosul and went to East, trying to look at some of their needs in terms of protection, but also shelter and other needs. You know, I think it's a mix of both physical assistance, in-kind assistance, but also legal protection, making sure that their rights are respected by all the warring parties. Yeah, and we have a long way to go to ensure protection for everyone.
Is there a class issue?
There are many issues.
Is it possible to say most internally displaced persons are economically less well off, not less well off, even?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean that you know, that could be one factor, but depends on the displacement. It depends on the conflict. Now the displacement is due largely to war, so everyone is fleeing because there's shelling. But it depends from one country to the other. I want to maybe move to the
other question. The question.
Yeah, I think there are some perceptions about what is humanitarian assistance, the cost of it, and this talk about fatigue. I also agree that humanitarian assistance is not enough. It is important at the start, but one has to build on the humanitarian assistance. And unfortunately, most of the time, I hear a lot of talk about the fatigue of humanitarian assistance, but nothing that accompanies a way out from humanitarian assistance to a dignified life. And I think that's what misses from our discourse. I'll give an example. The cost of feeding 500,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan, which is an expensive country, is equivalent to maybe 3 fighter jets, the cost of 3 fighter jets. So in terms of fatigue from humanitarian...
What time frame? 500,000 people for how long?
For 6 months. So in terms of fatigue, I think the issue is not fatigue, it's a question of prioritization. What is important? Is it important to provide dignified life for people who are fleeing war? If yes is the answer, then I would say the cost is minimal compared to the cost that everyone accepts to put for war. So I think that's one element. And second, I think the moment we have a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, one has to, and this is also our donors, has to also put the money for the longer term, for issues of education, for opportunities of livelihoods, which required a lot of investment in the host country. So countries like Jordan or Lebanon would need substantial economic investment so that jobs are created for the refugees to work in. If you have a setup where you are providing humanitarian assistance but not planning for medium longer term, you end up in a situation where 3-4 years down the line, you say, oh, we're too tired of providing humanitarian assistance, but you haven't done the homework to accompany refugees who, none of whom want to be on a handout. So I think it's important for us to remind everyone that the cost is a fraction of what is spent on war, that the answer is humanitarian plus longer-term development, so that we accompany those in need to safety.
One last question, but it's not a simple one. You know, as Armenians, we have for 100 years now talked about 1.5 million, and you very quickly realize it means nothing. It's a number that doesn't resonate. And so we've now realized you tell individual stories. You tell my grandmother's story, your grandmother's story, and that's a different way of reaching people and making your case. What, in your experience, is a way of reaching individuals in order to convince them that, in fact, there is something I can do, from as simple as, you know, what the American Political Action Committees now have learned, $3 a day, no big deal, it's the cost of a cup of coffee. Starting from there and going deeper. What works?
I don't think I have the answer for what works. I think what today's world allows us to do is to communicate. So I think social media platforms, simple things like WhatsApp, are powerful tools to communicate, break myths, because there's a lot of myth around, revolving around migration and refugees. I think communication is key, but also civil society is key in each country, because if you do have the information out there, we all select what we watch, what we read, what we listen to. So I think it's important that civil society, which is a civil society that adopts principles of tolerance, of gender equality and equity, of anti-xenophobia, all of these principles that we believe in. I think civil society, local civil society, using the tools that we have, would really provide an alternative to the discourse, which is a discourse, unfortunately, sometimes very anti the other. I think over the years of traveling and discovering different parts of the world, I've realized how much in common we have with people. I was actually today in the morning chatting with Abdurazak, who is a Somali refugee, who I met in Shusha camp on the border with Libya. And he actually texted me on Facebook a photo of him and I the first day he arrived at the camp. And Abdurazak now is resettled to the US. He is writing movie and theater scripts in Hollywood. He's not yet selling his product. Part-time taxi driver, and is volunteering for a resettlement organization. This person was stranded in Libya and then fled the war in Libya to come to Tunisia. Everyone has a potential. He is not yet satisfied. He told me, I said, what do you want to do next? He's like, I want to go back to real life. I said, what is real life? He said, I want to come and help in refugee camps. So I think we need to accept that everyone has a potential, and we will all be better off if we invest in the potential of others.
I can only say thank you, not just for the interview, but for you doing the work that you do on behalf of all of us, and call on all the rest of us to join the Aurora movement, the humanitarian efforts carried out around the world, and do what we can do, if for no other reason than in gratitude to those who saved our grandparents. Thank you, Hovigetia Mezian. Thank you to those of you following CivilNet Backstage at Aurora. We're not done. Stay tuned.
We have spoken with many women in our area, and for the most part, they're already very aware of the issues of anemia. And there are already existing initiatives in place within our local area to try to address anemia, but they've had very limited success. Local government hospitals provide iron supplements for free to anemic women. However, they are extremely difficult for many women to access. Because traditional iron supplements are in such high doses, they require frequent monitoring, meaning that women must repeatedly return to the hospital. There's also problems that sometimes when the supplements are provided, there's not enough guidance in how to take them, which results in the fact that many women stop taking the supplements because of side effects that they experience. There's also a number of superstitions and stigma surrounding the use of supplements, which means that many women never try to access them in the first place. In our project, we aim to take a multidimensional approach to this complex issue that deals not only with the causes, not only with the effects of anemia, but also with its underlying causes. Here's our video.
Kriya Iron is a student-run project at Mahindra United World College of India. Kriya Iron builds on the work of Kriya Empowerment Through Action, a project promoting women's empowerment through genuine challenges in the outdoors. For the past 4 years, Mahindra College students have engaged with over 80 young women from the valleys surrounding the college through weekly fitness, swimming, and cycling sessions. This physical training culminates in a month-long trek in the Indian Himalayas. Prior to this trek, participants undergo a series of medical examinations, including a hemoglobin test. In the first 2 years Kriya operated, 100% of its participants were found to be iron deficient, and an estimated 50% of women in the Pune district are anemic. Anemia, though primarily caused by the lack of iron in the diet, is also a gendered issue. Women's rates of anemia are significantly higher in our local context, both because of blood loss during menstruation and because of culturally propagated dietary patterns, ranging from women-only fasts to young women being served last within households. Infections, lack of hygiene, and insufficient intake of other micronutrients also contribute to anemia. On a day-to-day basis, iron deficiency results in lack of energy and fatigue, which propagates the idea of women as weak. Anemia is also directly or indirectly responsible for 40% of maternal deaths in India. Iron supplements are already available in local clinics. However, as a result of inaccessibility, stigma, and superstition surrounding the pills, this has done little to change the problem. Kriya Iron takes a multidimensional approach to this complex issue. We will leverage our existing relationships with Kriya women to introduce the use of iron ingots into the community. Originally created in Cambodia, the lucky iron fish releases iron when boiled in food. Safe, easy to use, and sustainable, it has been shown to provide 75% of required iron intake for the whole family. Working closely with the local NGOs Akshara and Family Planning Association of India and local facilitators Komal and Deepali, we will host community discussions and educational workshops with the stakeholders. Kriya Iron aims to tackle the issue of anemia and spark a conversation about nutrition. We empower participants to improve their own health by placing the solution directly in the hands of women. So, when we first started researching about this project, the initial questions that we asked ourselves were, how can we directly make an impact for those that are most strongly affected by anemia right now? Then, how can we prevent anemia from happening at such high rates in the future? And lastly, what are the social factors that we need to consider in order to properly tackle this issue? This is how we came up with Kriya Iron's 3 main goals. 1, addressing the pressing issue of anemia through introducing the lucky iron fish ingot into the local community. 2, raising awareness on micronutrient deficiencies and general health through workshops and discussions with the stakeholders. And lastly, empowering women to improve their own health. In order to reach these goals, we came up with a very detailed plan for the next 3, 6, and 12 months of our project. However, we hope for Kriya Iron to go beyond that. The Aurora grant would sustain our project for the next 4 years, reaching over 220 families in the villages surrounding the campus. Kriya Iron is to become a self-sustaining project, providing solutions that will remain viable as long as the issue of anemia remains a challenge. Since January 2017, we have been conducting research on the issue of anemia, on the context that we're working in, and on our project in general. Our first phase, starting in March 2017, includes working with the association Family Planning Association of India, which is a public health organization which provides medical clinics in which participants can get tested. Herewith, we will be conducting baseline testing on participants' hemoglobin levels in order to not only focus our project, but also to gain a greater understanding on the impact that we're having. In our second phase, once we return to campus after summer break, we wish to start a pilot of our project with Kriya women and their families. This sample group will be introduced to the issue of anemia and health, as well as the lucky ironfish ingot through cooking demonstrations. In our third phase is when we want to begin large-scale implementation in the wide community. Through a community launch event, we will be demonstrating again how to use the lucky ironfish, and will spark a conversation about nutrition and anemia in general. At this event, women will have the chance to become a part of our project by obtaining a lucky ironfish ingot. Through the local relationships and the local network that we have, we will be monitoring the use of the lucky ironfish and help with the implementation. At the end of the third phase, we will also be retesting all participants for their hemoglobin levels in order to evaluate our success. In our fourth phase, we aim to go beyond the ironfish ingot itself. We hope that by then, participants and women will have had so much exposure to discussions about nutrition and health that they will be able to make decisions about nutrition for their family and for themselves independently. Yeah. So throughout all these phases, we will also be driving conversations about anemia, about health, about micronutrients, and about diet in general by utilizing our existing relationships with the local community.
Our local network consists primarily of women. Women are disproportionately affected by anemia, but they're also uniquely well placed to address the issue. Cooking in households in our local context is done primarily by women, so meaning that when a woman decides to start using the iron fish, not only is she improving her own health, but she's also improving the health of her entire family. This empowers women by giving them ownership over their own health and the agency to have control over the health of their entire household. Our network begins with 3 members of our team, 2 of which are local facilitators. These women are hired as cultural conduits, and their role is to ensure that all the work the project does is closely communicated with the communities we aim to serve. In addition, we have the Kriya network. Over the 4 years that Kriya has operated, over 80 women have been involved in the project. Throughout the bi-weekly training sessions, the consistent contact and the fact we overcome so many challenges while working out together has led to an incredibly close bond. These women would be responsible for introducing the iron fish and driving forward discussion about micronutrients in their family and in the community at large. One such woman is Kriya participant Komal who is now our local facilitator. In 2015, Komal qualified to go to the Himalayan expedition. However, she was so severely anemic that she could not attend. The following year, Komal began to shift her dietary patterns, adding more spinach to the diet and other iron-rich foods, and with the support of her family, she qualified to the expedition again in 2015 and attended. In her own words, it was a dream come true. However, this is not all Komal did. Komal also took the initiative to educate other Kriya participants about the importance of iron in their diet. Up until this point, all the blood tests conducted by Kriya had concluded that every single participant was deficient in hemoglobin. That year, every single participant was sufficient in hemoglobin. Kriya Iron can make a dent in the issue of anemia by supporting an expanding network of women in taking agency over their own health. On behalf of Kriya Iron, thank you for your time and support.
Thank you so much for your amazing project. I personally found this presentation to be extremely informative. Thank you so much. And we would like to invite our next team from Waterford Kamshlaba UWC of Southern Africa, Swaziland. Students Ella Gilman-Pang and Eike Doroge, and Deputy Principal of UWC Waterford, Kate Doyle.
When we tell people that we go to Swaziland, the reaction we usually get is, what, Switzerland? No, Swaziland. Swaziland is a tiny little dot on the map of Southern Africa, wedged between South Africa and Mozambique. And that's where we go to school, as seen in the picture over here. Our school, Waterford Kamhlaba, the United World College of Southern Africa, has not always been a UWC. In fact, our school was founded many, many years ago in direct opposition to the racial segregation that happened in apartheid-era South Africa. And hence our school has always had a history of opposing disparities between groups of people. Hi, my name is Ike, this is Ella, and we're here to talk to you about Brave Girl Camp 2017.
All right. Swaziland is a beautiful country that we have just fallen in love with by living there. Swaziland has beautiful mountains and beautiful people and beautiful valleys and rivers and animals, but there's a huge problem that affects the women of Swaziland, and that is gender inequality. In Swaziland, the gender inequality issue is a large one. In fact, on the Gender Inequality Index of 159 countries, it is actually ranked 137th. This gender inequality index measures things such as economic empowerment, empowerment in general, and reproductive health rights. As a country, Swaziland's parliament is made up of 65 members. As it stands today, only 4 of those are women. The average birth age for a woman to give birth to her first child is merely 19. And so as you can see in Swaziland, the issue of women's empowerment and women's confidence is extremely dire.
Welcome back to CivilNet Live Backstage at Aurora. You have been watching some of the students from the United World College Dilijan, where we are today, talking about their approaches to possible solutions to the humanitarian challenges facing us. That, after all, is the message that Aurora wishes to bring. That is, that we each have a possibility, a potential, and a responsibility to do something. In the case of Armenians, it's in gratitude to those who saved our grandparents and in honor of those who did the saving. So in various capacities, we're speaking with guests today here at the Aurora Dialogues Day 1 to talk about the causes, consequences, and the place of Aurora in this incredible global humanitarian challenge. And our guest now is Hrad Balyan, who heads the conflict resolution program at the Jimmy Carter Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Hrad, welcome.
Thank you.
I've said often, I've said it to you, I've said to others, that I find the best way to try to understand what's happening in Syria is to listen to you. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's not what we're going to do today. But
thank you.
Yeah, but I do want to ask you, look, there's no question that those of us who are observing, listening, learning online or here physically are hugely appreciative of the fact that so many interesting people with such interesting portfolios are here. Why are you here? Why are the people with the portfolios here?
Well, it's an interesting opportunity to share our experiences with others who obviously are interested, come from all over the world, who are on the front lines, fighting battles every single day in extremely difficult situations, and not only to share our experiences with them, but also learn from them. I mean, the conversation yesterday with the 5 panelists of the Aurora Prize.
The 5 finalists.
Finalists.
The one that Don Miller moderated, yes.
It was phenomenal, in my view. The stories that they had to say, and this is what matters really, the personal stories that make a difference and convince people to join in. I bet you anything, there are thousands, if not millions, of the same people who are doing the same kind of work around the world, very anonymously, under the radar screen, very quietly and very courageously, I must say. And each one of those stories are worth hearing. And I hope that it not only emboldened us to continue the work we do, but it helped them embolden also and give them more courage and encouragement to continue the work. They're not alone, and we're not alone doing this work. That's why I'm here.
When you say they're not alone, we're not alone, does any of this work its way down to the actual people on the ground needing the help, the support, the push? Is the psychological, social, political engagement part of the process as important as the financial, or no? Is that not really so?
All of it is important. All of these aspects that you mentioned are important. the individual effort that the doctor from DRC is doing on a daily basis, seeing 500 patients a day in an extremely difficult situation. How can we say it's not making a difference? Of course it makes a difference, yes. But what concerns me is that we're dealing with the symptoms of the ugly world in which we live very often. What about root causes that generate the violations that these people very courageously are dealing with on a daily basis? It's a bottomless pit otherwise if we don't deal with the root causes. Humanitarian work is very, very important. Assistance is very, very important. Human rights defense is very, very important. But what generates these violations? Why does it happen? If we don't give this aspect any thought, then we're really throwing money in the bottomless pit, important as it is, okay?
So if we're talking about the role of individuals, the effort to convince individuals to take on responsibility and to in fact have impact, you're saying there are several directions in which people can do that. One of them is to work with the root causes and try to do away with them. The other is to actually what? To actually have impact on the humanitarian work that's being done?
And that impact can come by doing, by assisting those who are doing, by empowering those who are doing, by defending those who are doing the actual frontline work, but also by mobilizing and organizing society around us. Our own circles, we all have little circles around us. If we mobilize and organize the circles around us, then perhaps we can also get to the root causes by changing governments through democratic means. And that perhaps has the more fundamental impact on the violations that we're all dealing with.
At the very least, changing government policies.
And changing government, why not?
The effort to get the story out, what you said at the very beginning about the personal stories. Tomorrow there are several panels, all of which will be live streamed. One of them is about the responsibility of business. So if you were going to organize additional panels, what other kinds of panels would you organize? The responsibility of business, Hedo, the responsibility of, would you say media?
Media, absolutely. Educators, the responsibility of educators. To create a different culture in every country, in every milieu in which they're imparting education. We had a few examples this afternoon of educators trying to change, but we need many, many more millions of those kind of people who are changing this school in which this event is taking place. We have young kids from, well, young men, women from 60, 70, 80, 75 countries. These people are going to go back to their countries and are going to be leaders. I'm convinced of that. And leaders who know each other in 70 other countries, 75 other countries. And that's a phenomenal accomplishment, I think. I mean, the spirit that is being built in it is amazing. You know, I was fortunate enough in Beirut to go to a school where the principal was a former political leader, a prime minister. And one of the things he told us is,
well, let's just call it by its name. This is the Gemaran, and Simon Vratian
was the principal former prime minister. And he would tell us, question authority. This is the education I had, question authority. I'm not sure that my parents were very happy when I questioned authority and I got in trouble, but I did.
That's right. 20 years later, they were happy. But in the process of questioning authority, you're taking on responsibility, aren't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, I mean, questioning authority comes with responsibility, as you said, because you don't constantly poke fingers in government's eyes, as was discussed earlier. No, that was in the breakout session we discussed this afternoon. But we also have to work with governance, questioning what they're doing very quietly sometimes, under the radar screen, trying
or
to
loudly
persuade
when
them.
necessary.
First, quietly, okay, trying to persuade them, and when all attempts have been made quietly to change and nothing has changed, then of course we raise our voices and do this job loudly. Unfortunately, though, too many people do the loud part first without resorting to the quiet part.
One last question again about ways of fostering, encouraging, moving engagement, individual personal engagement. The Aurora Humanitarian Index, which was carried out over the last several months in 12 countries, the results of which were presented 2 days ago, will be presented again tomorrow, shows a couple of hopeless and hopeful things. One is that over the 2 years of this survey, apathy has increased. The other thing that it shows is when you parse out the numbers for apathy, it's worse in older groups and far less in younger groups. What do we do with that?
I mean, that's one thing we addressed also in the human rights panel, that we seem to have grown accustomed to seeing grave breaches of humanitarian laws, humanitarian norms, and it's become the normal. It's really become the normal, and this is what really troubles me. That bombing hospitals, it's normal, no big deal, or killing medical workers or humanitarian workers, or besieging communities and starving them. Starvation has become
a tool
of war, a weapon of war. These are the things that should not be acceptable. Yes, I understand the world has become a much more violent place, but there are certain things that we should not accept anymore, and we should revolt and stand up against it. Normalcy in violations of norms should not be acceptable to anyone.
One last question. The sentence that you just eloquently expressed is something that Armenians say often, except the term we use, the noun at the beginning is genocide. That all of the aspects of that are unacceptable. What is the responsibility of Armenians in this new global environment towards these kinds of atrocities, whatever they are? Is there, as an Armenian, would you say something to Armenians that is different, special, specific?
Look, peoples who have gone through atrocities, genocide, deportations, starvations, and famine, and etc., have a greater responsibility to convince the rest of the world that this kind of behavior is not acceptable in this civilization, in this world. We Armenians have even a greater responsibility, frankly, because both of us are probably are indeed survivors of parents and grandparents who survived the genocide. We have a greater responsibility to, first of all, be socially active and try to do good not just to ourselves and not just to Armenians, but also to others who are going through difficult times, and share our experience with them and our empathy and sympathy with them to try and make their life just a little bit, one iota better than it is.
Gratitude in action.
Yes.
Thank you, Hrad Balyan. Hrad Balyan heads the Conflict Resolution Program at the Carter Center in Atlanta, Georgia. He's one of the guests here at the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative Weekend, the Aurora Prize Weekend. And this is near the end of near the conclusion of the first day of the Aurora Dialogues. Tomorrow, Aurora will be broadcasting live the 3 panels on migration, on the role of business, the responsibility of business, and also on the Aurora Humanitarian Index. Stay tuned, we're not done for today, and you will of course be able to see all of this up on YouTube later, so tell your friends.
Welcome back to CivilNet Backstage at Aurora Dialogues. My name is Susanna Petrosian, and I'm here right now with Mrs. Maria Elena Aguero, who is the Executive Director of Club de Madrid, an organization which consists of former President presidents and whose mission is democracy that delivers. Thank you for speaking with us today, Marie.
Thank you, Susanna. You'll have the mic, okay.
Yes. What is the value for Club de Madrid for having its executive director here at this event today?
Okay, it's twofold, I'd say. We're in the process of examining and finding ways of working more closely with the Aurora Initiative and with other members of the Aurora Initiative in a number of possible projects, on a number of ideas, and it's very important for the Secretary General. That's my position, and as Secretary General, what I'm responsible for is the everyday work of the organization in terms of identifying the implementation of the projects and so on. So it's very important to really grasp and understand who you are and who you might be working for. On the other hand, there are in fact 4 members of the Club of Madrid that are participating in these events this day within the Aurora Dialogues, and it's always important again to accompany them, to be with them, and to, on the one hand, learn from them, and on the other, support them in this participation. Let me just add a little bit about the Club of Madrid. It is made up, as you noted, Susanna, of over 100 democratic former presidents and prime ministers. So it's not just presidents, and it's also heads of state and government in that sense. And they are individuals who have the experience of having been there and done that. They have the convening power because of who they are. They have the access to current leaders, and therefore can act as bridges in doing certain types of developing certain types of projects and ideas and bringing them to those decision makers today. The fact that they are no longer in office, but they have the experience, is a very enriching element, because they are able to share this experience and to speak more freely because they don't have the constraints of office anymore. So it is, and they come, our members, who are over 100 members from over, well, almost over 70 countries, are all men and women that have not only been former presidents and prime ministers, but held many other positions before, not only in government, but also in the private sector or in other kinds of activities. So their experience is varied, and it's very important to bring that experience to current leaders that are today tackling the challenges of governance, of good governance, of democratic transition, of consolidation of democracy, and that's basically the purpose of our interest in this dialogue on humanitarian issues.
You mentioned some of the challenges, global challenges that we have today. Would you say that there are, 2 or 3 of them that the organization is focused on at this point?
Yes, definitely. Although we've worked on many challenges that are related to good governance and to democratic values and democratic leadership, we of course have to organize our work. And at this point in time, our program is focused in 3 areas. On the one hand, Next Generation Democracy, which is a project that was started 3 years ago, when our members began to be very concerned about what was happening to the quality of democracy worldwide, not just in transitional democracies, but worldwide. And there, the objective of that project, that has a very regional focus, is to look at what has happened to democratic development in various regions, and where is that going, and what kind of democracy are we aiming to leave to the future generations. It's interesting because when the project was started 3 years ago, of course there was concern about the quality of democracy, but I think that concern is only growing. And today there is much more interest in this kind of analysis and discussion and dialogue, because the Club of Madrid too is all about dialogue. The other important program area is what we call our Shared Societies project, and it's our longest running project. It focuses on diversity and inclusion. Just earlier this morning, we heard I think he was the director of United World Colleges that talked about celebrating difference. Well, we've been talking about celebrating diversity through our Shared Societies project. We've been focusing on that for a number of years, focusing on the need to recognize the value and not just the difficulties of diversity, and to foster and promote inclusion, social inclusion, in at different levels and in different scenarios. The third part of our work in the coming 2 years is on radicalization and violent extremism, prevention and countering of radicalization and violent extremism. And at present, we are working in 3 target countries: Nigeria, Tunisia, and Lebanon, engaging with civil society, but also with governments, and bridging, trying to support dialogue between these 2 sectors of society, so that the national action plans and the activities that are developed in the countries in order to prevent and counter violent extremism are through the national action plans, are reflecting not only experiences from other regions, not only ideas and views from other regions, but also what the country's own civil societies are saying and feeling.
And is there room for countries like Armenia to join Club de Madrid?
It's not countries that join. The members, thank you for the question, because that's a very important one. The members of the Club of Madrid only represents themselves, their experience, and their willingness to continue acting in order to foster democracy and democratic values and leadership. We have, from some countries, we have 4 members. From others, we have just 1, and from others we have none. I mean, it's not like you automatically become a member of the Club of Madrid once you leave office. But a democratically elected former president or prime minister of Armenia, if and when leaving office, if he's interested in somebody else, there are procedures through which and criteria that has to be considered, and it is the members themselves that select other members. So and that selection process is kicked off either by somebody manifesting interest in joining the Club of Madrid, or other members nominating them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name's Rayan. I'm from Sudan, and I came here because I really believed in the UWC mission. So I came just to live here for 2 years of my life and try a new experience, something different from what I've been living back home. And yeah.
My name is Anda, and I'm also from Sudan. The reason why I decided to come to UWC that the mission was really attractive for me, and I believe that it's something, UWC is such a figure we need in this world to help build the peace in the world, and hopefully reach the lasting peace, if we can say, yeah.
Are there any parallels to be drawn between the Aurora initiatives and the UWC Dilijan mission statement?
I would say there are a lot, and valuing humanity is one of the main commons between UWC and Aurora Prize. So, yeah.
Do you want to recite the mission statement?
There's in terms of the dialogues that have been happening today, what has resonated with you? What I think brings you closer to your mission here as a student? You're in your second out of 3 years, correct?
2 years.
Oh, yeah. 2 years.
Second year and this year.
Okay.
So, especially in the dialogues we had, the person who was leading our discussion was Dr. Tom Kuntita, and I think it was very close to home to us because he's been working in Sudan, and we're both Sudanese. So it was very eye-opening to see that all the small actions he did and all the difficulties he faced just by trying to help out and reach out to the people living in the area, living in like in these harsh conditions. And it shows that like the strength and perseverance that he had, which are the very core values that we learn here, that you should do whatever you can to help someone in a situation, even if at the moment it doesn't seem as significant as you want it to be. And that's what he spoke to us about, which was very empowering and eye-opening. And I guess that's what I really valued about the Aurora Dialogues that we had today.
So the youth is really something that has been talked about all day today, really the cornerstone of what Aurora is trying to do. There's a lot of emphasis on actionable items for the youth. Could you share if there are any immediate plans of yours or long-term plans to work in this field, or are you into other disciplines? Just to give us a sense of what a Sudanese student at UWC Dilijan is thinking right now.
If I talk about myself as the Sudanese student before coming to UWC, I wanted to be an engineer. But then I came here and all my subjects changed my field of interest and what I'm going to do. And hopefully, if I make it to Westminster next year, I'll be doing development and international relationships. So it's quite related. And this is something I would really love to do, is to go on with the human rights field, because this is what the world needs now. And this is how we're going to support each other. I think, finding humanity, finding the way to use it can be an end for every political conflict or whatever kind of conflict we have in the world now. So let's believe in humanity and we can do something.
For me, I am not quite sure about what I'm going to do next, but one of the classes I'm taking right now is global politics, and one of my favorite units we've been learning is peace and conflict and human rights. Before coming here, I didn't really know much about this field. I didn't even know I have such a strong passion for it, but I'm thinking about going back home and doing something about, like, from the skills I've learned here, because we're very privileged to be here and learn such skills and go back and apply them and help the people, even if it's in small ways, even if it's just having basic conversations and helping people from day-to-day life. I guess that's what I'd be doing next.
One last question out of curiosity. Why UWC Dilijan? Why Armenia? This is a global network and you could go anywhere. Why here?
In fact, we had no choice where to choose where we go. But I think in Armenia, we've made a change. We as a UWC movement, because it was chosen here to help also the country to develop more. And I feel like Armenia was quite far from Africa, from the Middle East and all the culture. And I think us being here, like UWC being here, brought so many diversity also. And that's a good choice, to bring your identity, to bring yourself to a new, different place. So.
For me, honestly, it was why not? It was something different. It was a new challenge to take, a new risk, and it seemed very adventurous, I guess. So why not? Why not Armenia?
Thank you so much for your time.
This concludes CivilNet Live Backstage at Aurora. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for following the Aurora live broadcast today. And we hope that you follow Aurora tomorrow as well, when 3 different panels will tackle various aspects of the humanitarian challenges facing the world. And all of them will be live streamed. They'll be available on the Aurora YouTube channel. And it is a way to follow from anywhere in the world the complex but passionate, insightful discussions about individual responsibility in trying to meet the challenges that face all of us, including Armenians. At the end of the day, the Aurora motto is gratitude in action, that we as survivors are grateful for those who helped our ancestors survive, and we want to turn that gratitude into action. Part of the way of doing that is to hold this weekends of activities. We're very thankful that you followed us, and please continue to follow CivilNet as well.